Welcome to the Vantage HR Influencers Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Vantage Circle, the simple and AI-powered rewards and recognition platform for employee engagement.
It is said that the pandemic is changing the rules of talent development and management. Employers must be proactive in designing comprehensive strategies to determine which skills they require to remain competitive and, most importantly, how to acquire them, whether through new hires or reskilling and upskilling their current staff. Let's know more about the opportunities in talent development post-pandemic with our guest speaker today, Christine Rumble. Christine is passionate about developing organizations through enabling leadership and lifelong learning. She is the founder and principal consultant at Dawn Consulting Services that transforms leaders and culture. Welcome to the show, Christine.
Hi, welcome.
Okay, so before we start with the topic today, that is the opportunities in talent development post-pandemic, please tell us a brief about your journey in the corporate world.
So I started in the hospitality industry about 30 years ago, originally working in resorts as activities manager and then transitioning into hotel operations where I worked all areas and a range of locations, including as front office manager, bars manager, conference catering manager, and eventually to general manager of a hotel. And then throughout my career, I weaved in and out of learning and development or training roles. And eventually that led my career into human resources. I was the head of Academy Core for Pacific when a core started to expand rapidly in Asia. And I was invited to move to Singapore in 2011 to set up the Asia Pacific Academy or Learning and Development Department for a core. That role then developed into learning and development and talent management. And then in 2016, I was seconded to our global office in Paris to help roll out a global capability framework, which we developed in Asia. And that became the framework for all of the hotels around the world. And while I was there, we purchased Fairmont Raffles Swiss Hotels. So I actually led the integration for the talent management team for their integration while I was there. And then in 2017, ended up back in Singapore, where I was Chief Talent and Culture Officer for a core in Asia Pacific. So in that role, I was responsible for human resources for 23 countries, 1,200 hotels and around 140,000 employees in total. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, that role was dissolved as part of the Asia Pacific layer was dissolved at the company. And so I've returned back to Australia, where I've set up my own business.
Okay, great. So let's start with the topic that is the opportunities in talent development post-pandemic. So, Christine, our people are our most valuable asset, and it's a business phrase that has a lot of truth in it. So the thing about assets, though, is that their worth is always decided by how much time and effort we put into them. And that's pretty much where the idea of talent development strategies has landed. So to begin, would you like to highlight some of the most important talent development byproducts?
Yeah, I think we know that when we have engaged employees, then productivity and profitability increases. And talent development is a great way to keep our employees engaged. It demonstrates that as a business that you value them, and that providing, that when we do talent development, that we don't just train for training's sake, that we actually look at each individual and develop and design content or a program that's suitable for them. I think talent development needs to be seen as a strategic activity. And if we can identify the skills and talent for the future, not just right now, it actually provides us with a great pipeline for the future. And we always talk about finding it difficult to get critical roles filled. But when we can do that internally, then we retain our talent more. So talent development is a great strategy there to help.
Right. Okay. So for the past few months, we have been attempting to strike a balance between ensuring each employee's well-being while also implementing new tactics to help the entire business remain competitive and prepare for the future. So will traditional methods of training and development still be applicable in the post-pandemic business sector, or will new approaches be required?
I think that there was actually a new era of training coming prior to the pandemic, and the pandemic's actually just accelerated that process a little bit. More and more, obviously, information is available on the internet, and millennials are able to search that information themselves. So to deliver training content, it needs to be more than just information. It really needs to be transformative. And therefore, the way that we deliver that training needs to be different. So I think, the other part of this process is that employees are looking at not just companies that develop them for their work skills, but life skills as well. And with well-being now being a really important part of the workplace, companies that offer things like, photography lessons or art and craft or something like that, that they can access through
related
work.
to their hobbies, maybe.
It actually really shows that they value the employee as an individual rather than just as an employee. And I think that's really important to help organisations be the best place to work or best choice for employees to work if they can show that they are developing individuals beyond just the workplace.
Right. So it's like bringing in their personal values into their work values, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Yeah. So what are the most important areas of change to concentrate on right now?
I think there's a couple of areas that we need to look at. One is the actual workforce planning in general. We talk about workforce planning as looking at where and when and how to secure your talent and skills for critical workflows. But we need to reimagine new jobs of the future. And one thing the pandemic's shown us is that companies that survive are the ones that are adaptable and agile. So in order to be agile, we need to not think about job roles, but job skills. And only when we can start to think about skills rather than roles can we be really a multi-skilled workforce, which is agile based and can, shift as the business shifts. So I think a lot of companies now need to ask themselves, do they need to operate the same way as they did pre-COVID? How has their business changed? How has their customers changed? How does their interaction with the customer look different? And what do they need to do to be able to service that? And what are the skills that they need in order to be able to do that?
Right.
I think that the other areas around that mental health wellness that we talked about before, Forbes magazine said that over 47% of all adults are actually experiencing negative mental impacts as a result of the pandemic. So considering how much time is spent at work, we really need to encourage companies to look at their work environment and what can we do to minimise the exposure to anxiety for our employees. So I think that the whole culture that organisation will have and talent development comes part of that culture to be able to give new experiences to the employees by looking at the wellness, looking at things like resilience programs and what can we do to help employees adjust and be more agile when they're coping with stress and change, which is often happening at the moment and will continue to happen post-pandemic because things will change the way they do things today.
Right. So
and the third area I just want to touch on is that diversity and inclusion, because I think, we're hearing that a lot in the media at the moment, and it actually has a big place to play in talent development. It's looking at, inclusivity, that when we're creating talent development programs, are we being inclusive of everyone? What can we do to make sure that we're not missing out people in that process?
Right. So, Christian, you mentioned about skills in the first point. So, when you talk about skills in talent development, the advantages of skill training to improve your current crew are just what many businesses require right now. So, what are the advantages of hiring an outside trainer over hiring one in-house? Or if you think it's otherwise?
I think this is it's a tough decision that each company has to make on their own because, in today's environment, obviously funding is often challenging. So how much money do you have to spend? If you have good quality internal trainers, highly skilled trainers, they can actually be very valuable to the organisation because they actually understand the company values and can be the custodian of the culture to make sure that the right culture is filtered through every layer in the business, because the trainers are touching every layers of the business. But at the same time, that can be very insular. So I'm a believer that for your senior executives, that it's of value to have an external person come in and deliver some leadership training, because it gives new insights, new perspectives, and stops that silo thinking. So I think in the ideal world, if companies can afford it, have some external for the senior level, but develop internal trainers as well on the inside.
Right. Okay. So my next question is a little long, but I'll continue with that. That is, most companies have a large library of learning products ranging from workshops to films to white papers. But the most significant learning programs have always been given in person, and they are the ones where everyone could gather in one location to learn from the facilitator as well as from each other. So, due to the inability to conduct in person programs in the period of physical distancing, businesses must rely on their e-learning library to grow their employees professionally. So video learning, gamification, and social learning are also options, and ideally most companies are already having this ready as a part of their L&D now. So are these tools ideal in your opinion, or do you believe that in this critical juncture leaders should reconsider how they establish their personal brand with some unique innovation?
I think there's certainly a place for these tools, and they're beneficial to have in the L&D toolkit. But I think there is a huge opportunity for leaders to become leader coaches. Nothing can replace the personal development that one receives when they have the opportunity to learn direct from their leader. And this could be formalized through a mentoring program, or it could be informal coaching sessions with their direct manager. I think coaching is actually one of the key leadership skills that a manager needs to have in this post-pandemic world. And it's very important to add that to the L&D toolkit.
Right. Okay. So again, it's a multi-generational workplace, Christine, whether it be baby boomers, Generation X, millennials, or Generation Z. So it's no coincidence that on average, older professionals are less confident in their abilities than their younger counterparts. I have this piece of information from a research. I'll link to the source in the show notes. That says 60% of baby boomers believe that they lack the skills needed to withstand a potential layoff, while only 49% of millennials believe they do. So, because they anticipate they'll retire soon, a number of companies do not invest in learning and development programs for senior employees. So, isn't there a lot to think about here, considering that every generation deserves to learn and be a part of your talent development strategy?
Yeah, I agree. Look, it's a difficult decision for companies to make, as there's not an infinite amount of money for learning and development. But that's where I think the digital tools and the libraries can be really beneficial. If you place a percentage of the budget on these tools and make it available to all talent, regardless of their age, then that prevents that type of discrimination. And it's not just a senior, it could be, certain segments within the business that might feel that they're missing out on learning and development. So then the company can then focus the rest of their L&D funds on resources that are more targeted towards their high potential employees and develop that future pipeline. So, for example, at AHRI, we introduced a virtual learning program to help prepare employees for retirement. And this was well received and helped some of our older employees transition to the next chapter of their life. For other older or mature employees, they were finding it difficult to use the digital tools. So we did a co-mentoring program where we partnered up a millennial with a mature employee, and they co-mentored each other. So the mature employee was able to give their experience and their knowledge to the younger employee, and the younger employee was able to give them the digital knowledge to help them in the place.
Right. Okay. So where does talent development go from here? What are the most important talent development trends we can expect to see in the coming years? Or are there any specific skills that should be developed post-pandemic?
Yeah, I think the number one skill that we need to develop post-pandemic is emotional intelligence. I think that's critical for today and future leaders. And it's really important as a leader that you have empathy. And we talk about being an empathetic leader, but it's a hard skill to actually qualify. And I think that empathy allows leaders to genuinely understand the consequences of the decisions on everyone in the company. And it means that leaders are able to inspire and encourage and strategize in ways that will motivate the employees across the board, which will then help with that engagement and productivity that we talked about earlier. In terms of learning styles and learning trends that are there, I'm a strong believer in blended learning. And I think that all programs that companies develop, it's very easy to just flick to e-learning because it's an easy tool and it's available for everyone. But I think if they're really serious about developing people, then it should be part of the learning journey that people take. And that includes doing self-assessments to bring out awareness of people's behaviors. It should have, yes, some self-paced learning, but also should have some instructor-led learning. And whether that's a virtual program or whether that's face-to-face, depending on the situation of COVID in the country that they're operating in. I think there needs to be workplace projects to be able to apply the learning. There needs to be expeditions to go and see other companies, how they operate, or secondments within their own company to other departments to see how they operate. And of course, that coaching and mentoring to be part of that. So learning shouldn't be one-dimensional. It shouldn't be just go to a training session and then expect the person to be able to apply that learning to the workplace. I think it's really important that there is a number of different methods, and that has been the case in the past, and I think it will continue to be the case in the future, but more of those hands-on exhibitions and that sort of thing will be important moving forward.
Okay, so is there any talent development resource that you want to suggest our listeners go through?
Look, for those that are on LinkedIn, there's a lady called Stacey Ashley. If you're not linked up with her, have a look. She's an Australian leadership expert and thought leader in change management. Okay. And she's got 3 books available on Amazon at the moment. And her last one is called Show Up. And in terms of leadership development, it's a great book to refer to have a look at. It really talks about, begin with leading yourself before you can lead others. So definitely something that I would recommend that people have a look at.
Okay, brilliant. So what would be your suggestions to the HR listeners listening to us now?
I think, really look at the way that your company or your structure, your business is operating in terms of learning and development. Build your programs with long-term thought in process rather than just right here, right now. What are we looking at in 5 years' time? What are the skills that we need in 5 years' time? What do we need to do to retain our talent over that time period? There's going to be a talent shortage more than what there was before, because employees are looking for organisations that really looked after their employees over the pandemic period. So it's really important to look at what value are you giving employees? How can you retain the ones that you have? Because it will be very difficult to get new talent because there is going to be a talent shortage in the workplace. And we all know that if you can retain your talent, then you have a better engagement with your customers, because customers want to deal with the same people. They want people who knows them and knows what they want. If you have high turnover, then that has a direct impact on the service that you're delivering to your customers. So I think it's really important to think from a talent development point of view, not only for now, but also the next 5 years as well.
Okay. So finally, how can our listeners reach out to you, Christine?
You can connect with me on LinkedIn or email me directly at info@dawnconsultingservices.com, and check out my website as well, which is dawnconsultingservices.com.
Great. It was amazing conversation, Christine. Thanks a lot for joining me in the Vantage HR Influencers podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Vantage HR Influencers podcast. Please do subscribe to Vantage HR Influencers podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and our YouTube channel for new episodes.